following is a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production.
We are back. Degraw's Yankees on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. I'm Ralph Tycho, and here is the man himself, Jack Degraw.
How are you today, Ralph?
Oh, could not be better. Sunny California, although it's a little overcast the last few days, certainly not complaining. And you're in Florida where it never gets overcast except it rains every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Am I right about that?
Well, yeah, in the summer, but I'll tell you, it's changed. It rains a lot at night now. But today in Florida, we're having a cold spell. It's actually like 64 degrees, so everybody's all bundled up.
Well, 64 degrees would be nice in Northern California at this time of the year. So you're not all that bundled up at 64. Think what it would be back in New Jersey.
I hate to think it's probably about 12 degrees and snowing.
Right, and no school tomorrow because of all of it, and no garbage collection and all those things. They go into a northeast winter that we both got away from. I came to California, you went to Florida. I may have asked you this, what precipitated your move to Florida? I know it was you're pretty much a Yankee fan, but you can't just follow the Yankees. What do you do to get by?
Well, the thing is, Ralph, I get a pension now, and I used to sell, I sell things online, and I teach tennis and stuff. So, I always made enough to get by because fortunately I had the good sense never to get married.
Oh, okay.
And have kids.
That's a topic for another podcast, but I will say I teach tennis too. I teach one lesson. Bend your knees, keep your head down. That's all. That's basically it. Am I right about that?
Well, that's right. Just keep your eye on the ball because if your head comes up, you're not going to like what you see.
Right. Good point. Good point. Yankees. Talk a little Yankee ball. I love to have hot stove leagues with you because I grew up in New York and my Giants left when I was 11, and until the Mets came in, I can't say a Yankee fan, but I was definitely a Yankee worshiper in terms of I worshiped the greatness of what I saw growing up. From, like I say, I'm 72. From 51 on, I followed it, and if I go back to 51, the Yankees beat the Giants in the World Series after that miracle shot heard around the world, and the miracle comeback with the Giants, and I always felt they held over them. Gil McDougall hit a grand slam home run. I ended up being his biggest fan. I thought he was just great, and which leads us into what we were going to talk about in our hot stove, and that's Yankee infielders of our time growing up. And I mentioned Gil McDougall being great only because of his versatility. Yankees won championships with him as a regular third baseman in 51, as a regular shortstop in 57, and as a regular second baseman, I think it was 58. But all three years, he played a different infield position, and they won championships. How great is that? How great was it for Stengel to be able to rely on this guy's versatility?
Yeah, he was really one of those unsung heroes. And when you look back, I mean, he played everywhere, And he was an all-star at all three positions. And, I mean, every place he played great, and he hit well in the World Series, and he was just another terrific Yankee.
Right. And so let's go back to the evolution of the infield along the way. We could talk about Billy Martin a little bit, how he came to be first a major leaguer and then a regular, pretty much as a consequence of Jerry Coleman being called back to duty. He was a slick fielding second baseman, and he went on to be a terrific announcer, both for the Yankees for a short period of time, and he became an icon in San Diego, mostly known for his malaprops, much like Phil Rizzuto was, another great Yankee infielder. So, but let's talk Billy Martin. Let's talk his World Series successes. He outplayed Jackie Robinson in the World Series consistently. He was really one of those guys who came up big in the clutch.
Well, the interesting thing about Billy Martin, he played for Casey Stengel in the Pacific Coast League. So that's how, Casey knew what a scrapper Billy was. But, I mean, when Billy got in the World Series, I mean, the one series he hit over 500, I believe that's 1953. And the interesting thing, Ralph, I was doing some research. From 1947 through 1964, the Yankees were in 15 World Series. And every World Series, except 1956, one of their infielders hit over 300.
Whoa.
The only year was 56, and Billy hit 296. And in the 63 series, Phil Linz went 1 for 3 as a pinch hitter, but he was an infielder too. But I think that's an incredible stat.
Absolutely incredible. How goes to show you how the folks you may be least expected to see as World Series heroes turn out to be that way. And Martin, kind of the poster boy for that. If you look at a Yankee lineup that included Yogi Berra, Mickey Mantle, all the way down the line, Elston Howard, would you expect Billy Martin to be a World Series hero? Probably
no,
not.
But he stepped it up, and another outstanding World Series player was Bobby Brown. Bobby Brown was 18 for 41 in the World Series, in 47, 49, and 51. He hit over 400.
Well, we had Bobby Brown on the Peter Golenbach show last year. Well into his 90s, he is as articulate as anyone we've had on the show. There's a guy who kept his brain together all those years after having been a Major League ball player. And as a Major League ball player, he was going to medical school and studying. There's the famous Yogi Berra story when they were roommates, and Yogi Berra was reading a comic book, a Superman comic book, and Bobby Brown was reading Grey's Anatomy, and they were about to turn off the lights and end it. And Yogi says to Bobby Brown, he says, how'd yours turn out? I could picture those two as roommates and Bobby Brown enjoying Yogi's company because everybody loved Yogi. You didn't have to be a ball player. You didn't have to be a baseball fan. But if you come across Yogi in any way, through his literature, when I say that, his quotes and his famous sayings, or his being, he universally loved loved guy, Yogi Berra.
Well, Yogi just made the world a better place to live in. He was a great human being.
Yes, and a great husband. He always was smart enough to defer to his brilliant wife. She made brilliantly, incredibly great business decisions. Boy, I'm rambling off on brilliant stuff, but Carmen Berra kept it together for that family. And Yogi was said to be lucky, but financially. But it's not just luck. Guys like with big money, Mantle, just didn't do well financially. He didn't have the guidance of a steady human being. So, if you got married, Jack, you might have had that. All married.
Well, I might have had a Yoo-Hoo place in New Jersey, like Yogi did, and have a bowling alley with Phil Rizzuto, and had the Yogi Berra Museum in Montclair, and his sons worked there, and I had the pleasure of going down there a couple times. And had Yogi autograph some cards for me. And if anybody lives up in New Jersey, check out the Yogi Berra Museum. It's a great place.
I think it was Darryl Berger, a guest on my show, who ran that. He didn't run the museum, but he was a guide in that museum. So. I've heard about it, and Yogi always hung around, and he never big leagued anybody. And for a person of his stature to be the absolute opposite of a guy like Reggie Jackson just comes to mind, who looks down on fans and doesn't look them in the eye, that kind of thing. Yogi had that ability to communicate with human beings, and I love him for that. I love him for being the Met manager in 1973 and hanging in with that team that got off to a horrible start. And there were all kinds of rumors, stuff in the paper, over-unders as to when he and Cashman would be fired. And he brought that team back, and they won the pennant. They lost in the World Series, but tremendously complicated guy. And there's an autobiography of him that's out there written by a guy named Barra, Barra, very close to Berra. And can't think of his first name, but it really gets by the fluff of his career. Take the fork in the road, if you blah, blah, his statements. He was much more complicated as a human being than that. And by the way, if you ever do come to a fork in the road, take it.
Yeah.
He was right.
Well, that was a good book, Ralph. I have read that. And, an interesting thing, like when Yogi would come to spring training, he was so involved. Like a lot of times in the morning, like the players who would stay behind, Yogi would come in the cart with Joe Torre, and he'd be dressed in his road grays, and he'd watch, batting practice. And then, he'd go on the bus to Lakeland or Dunedin or whatever, and he'd sit in the dugout with the team. And, when they have pitching practice, he would sit behind the screen, and with Girardi was manager and Joe Torre. So, it was just great seeing him down here because, it's not the same without him.
Well, there's another book, speaking of books about and with Yogi, Louisiana Lightning, Rod Guidry, kind of befriended Yogi in a way that old-timers do with really old-timers, if you know what I mean. And
yeah.
They bonded because in the later years, really, Yogi needed a little help getting around, and he was just getting up in age, and Guidry would drive him to these away games in spring training and what have you, and they communicated beautifully, and it was a way that touched my heart, because you had a southern guy, Guidry, communicating with a northern guy, and when I say that, Yogi had roots in what is not the South, not the North, where he grew up. So, but just the way they got together, and that was another good book that in Yankee lore that goes down as being great.
Well, here's another story, Ralph. I had a friend, Johnny, who wanted Yogi's autograph. So he went over to the hotel where Yogi was staying. And he seen Yogi come down, and Yogi asked him, and he signed for him, and he had breakfast with him. And he sat with Yogi for like 40 minutes and talked. So that's how down the earth the guy was.
Whoa. Oh. Now, if he went there specifically for Yogi, and he was looking forward to just getting an autograph, that would have been, and he got it, say, just the autograph. That would have been one of the best days in your friend's life.
Yeah.
But that alone, but the fact that he sat down with him and had breakfast, absolutely cool. Very cool. Very cool. That was down in Florida.
Yeah, right down here in Tampa. Because Yogi would come down here he'd stay for maybe 3 weeks. And like I say, Ralph, he's missed. Stick Michaels missed. I mean, I miss a lot of those guys.
Yeah. You post a lot of pictures on Facebook of former Yankees. It's amazing how, not just Yankees, Dodgers, Giants, people I grew up in New York following as a kid, mostly gone. How few survived, and that's why Dr. Brown and Eddie Robinson and the fact that we're blessed to have them into their 90s is incredible. But mortality is always going to be the big winner, and we're going to be the big losers, because slowly but surely we lose these people. And thank God we have our memories of them, and we have such incredible writing over the years. Peter Golenbach, Marty Appel has chronicled them. When I was a kid, I grew up reading a book. Joe Meany wrote a great book on the
Okay,
Yankees.
Yep.
I still have that in my library somewhere. And there's another guy, unsung, now that I mention it, books, we start talking about that. I have a book in my library that, if you want to talk Yankee memories, it's called Yankee Stadium. And it talks about, of course, all of the Yankees, but it was written by Joseph Durso, and he does a great job on the Yankees in that book. There's another book that I have, a guy named Robinson edited a picture book on the Yankees that I get a lot of pleasure in looking at. It's called Pennants and Pinstripes, the Yankees from 1903 to 2002. And I'm sure there's an updated book, but it's Ray Robinson and Christopher Jennison. So Yankee fans, if you really want some good pictures and a good history of the team, refer to any of those books. Peter's book, Dynasty, is a classic. Marty Appel has a book that is considered a history book of the Yankees as well. We're blessed if whether you're a fan, an apologist, or a worshiper, we're blessed with great literature. And nice being a Yankee fan for that reason, huh?
Yeah, I mean, Peter's book was fantastic. And another great book was Marty Appel. He had this book out a couple years ago. And there was information, you're going to find in there that you won't find in any other book. So the research he did was incredible. That's a fantastic book.
And Marty Appel had the good fortune of being the Yankee publicity man, and he had access to all this stuff that he was nice enough to share with Peter Golenbach when Peter Golenbach wrote Yankees. And that was when the Yankees were owned by the ex-president of CBS. I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but
Mike Burke.
Mike Burke. And Steinbrenner bought the team from Mike Burke, and the rest is history along those lines. But Mike Burke, according to Peter, according to Marty Appel, was one of the sweetest human beings, the most generous human beings going. And there's a guy dismissed.
Well, I'll tell you a couple. I remember going to Yankee games in the late 60s, and Mike Burke would sit in the stands, right, with the fans. I remember going to a game in '68 when Stick Michael got in a fight with Tony Horton at first base, and Michael Burke was like 2 rows over. And another thing, Ralph, Mike Burke was also like a spy in the Second World War. The movie, I believe the movie's name is Cloak and Dagger, and Gary Cooper played in the movie. And I think that's based on the experiences of Michael Burke.
Whoa, I did not know that. Very interesting. That's a big surprise. You live a life and you have Gary Cooper emulate you in the movies. That's not bad.
Let me share this story, Ralph, before I forget it. In 1956, when the Yankees released Phil Rizzuto on Old Timers Day, Stuffy Sternweiss got in contact with the Scooter. They played together on the great teams in the 40s. And Sternweiss told Scooter, he says, don't say anything. Just get away for a week. Don't say anything bad against the Yankees. It'll hurt you later in career. And maybe you'll remember this, because in September of '56, I don't remember, I was only a week old, but Phil Rizzuto took over for Frankie Frisch, who had a heart attack, and did the post games for the New York Giants.
Whoa, I do not remember that. That is incredible. But I know Red Barber was instrumental in bringing Rizzuto into the booth, because the three of them, Mel Allen, and Red Barber and Phil Rizzuto, made a great team. And Phil Rizzuto was an excellent announcer when he first started. He became sort of a caricature of himself with I'm leaving early, this type of thing as he got older. But originally, he brought a great flavor. I think he was one of the first players to go into the booth at of my time anyway, growing up. I was 10 at that time, and it was disgraceful how they released him on Old Timers Day. That was absolutely horrible. I didn't realize that he had gotten advice from Sternweiss. And speaking of infielders, getting back to him, he was one of the early infielders in my fandom, and he died tragically in a subway accident, of all things.
Yeah, the story I heard, the bridge was supposed to be up, and it was down, and they drowned in the river. It was something along that lines. I'm not exactly sure of the story, positive, but it was 1958 because I think they had a subway crash, and a lot of the people drowned.
Yeah, I think it might have been earlier than that, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong, but I think it might have been earlier than 58. No, it couldn't have been much earlier based on the story you just mentioned about Rizzuto. So you're probably accurate there. But that did contribute to his getting a lifetime job with the Yankees. He could have just blown it off, as he would have been entitled to do. What a horrible way to treat players. And that was just not George Weiss. It was pretty much the plantation owners' mentality, because they had these guys. They owned them. There was nowhere to go before free agency. And
they were heartless. I mean, let's not forget, Ralph. I mean, Del Webb, who was one of he was a higher up in the Yankees. He built a lot of those internment camps for the Japanese people during World War II. So, but that's a whole other story.
Yes, and how quickly things change in the way political correctness and what have you. That was the expression back then, the Japs. Yeah. Just the way of the world, the changing way of the world. So Sternweiss was the second baseman, and Rizzuto was the shortstop. And as it evolved, when Rizzuto retires, Gil McDougall takes over, and then comes Tony Kubek. And you touched a couple of weeks ago on the competition for that job initially with Tom Tresh, who was heralded at that time. I mean, Kubek was steady, but they looked to Tresh to be a future superstar.
Yeah, I mean, Tom Tresh had some the first couple of years. I mean, he had some big home runs in the World Series. He had homers off Kovacs and Gibson in '62. He hit a big home run to win a game, and there was that great picture with Huggity's dad, Mike, who played catcher for the White Sox. And then Tom hurt his knee, and he was just never the same after that. He couldn't hit after that. And it would have been interesting to see what kind of team they would have had, if Tom Tresh would have lived up to his potential and Joe Pep would have lived up to his, and the Yankee team from the Yankee team from '68 through '73. They talk about that as the bad times, but let me tell you, Ralph, I was a real fan then, and they weren't that bad. They were over 500, so it wasn't like the glory years, but it wasn't that bad.
You must remember Jake Gibbs.
Yep.
Speaking of guys that just didn't come into it, Ole Miss, quarterback from Ole Miss, much heralded guy, and just didn't pan out. It's what a lot of people refer to as the Horace Clark years. As you say, they weren't all that bad, but that you talk about the expectations of a fan base that grew up in a city where they thought it was their birthright to play in the World Series. And it didn't happen. Mickey's downhill slide coincided with those years. And that was the sadness of it all, to see his career diminish.
Well, for one thing, Ralph, Jake Gibbs is a Hall of Fame college quarterback for Ole Miss. It's a shame because Mickey lost 10 points off his batting average, career average, the last 4 years. And if you look at films of Mickey in the last couple of years, I mean, the poor guy couldn't even move. You know, I was fortunate to see Mickey hit 3 home runs live, but you know, it was a shame to watch Mickey Mantle in the last few years.
Yeah, I got to tell you a memory of a kid that used to go to doubleheaders at Yankee Stadium, and this must have happened about 4 or 5 times over the years, where Mickey would play the first game of the doubleheader, and there'd about 10 minutes after the game, they would put up the lineups for the second game, and there was kind of a dull chill in the lineup when Mickey wasn't expected to play the second game, but they'd always put up number 17. Norm Seaburn would play center field in the second game of a doubleheader, and it was such a downer. You just didn't want to see Mickey out of there.
Yeah, I mean, I remember going to games, and, you know, the second game you would see Andy Costco or Ross Moschito or Luke Clinton, you know, and but I do remember a doubleheader, Ralph, in 1968. It was Memorial Day, and Mickey went 5 for 5 against the Washington Senators, and I think he pinch hit the second game. But that's you know, that was a great memory.
Yeah, if you young people listening out there, a doubleheader was when with one admission you could go and see 2 games. Now, if you find that today, good luck.
Yeah, you have the separate admission. I remember going to a doubleheader in 1996, and I had people ask me, do we have to go outside and buy tickets and come back in? I said, no, this is the old-fashioned way. You can stay for both games.
People just didn't understand it.
Yeah.
All right, here's a guy I want to talk about, Andy Carey. Andy Carey, I grew up in Alameda, California, where I make this is my hometown. I've been here 25 years. And Andy Carey was a third baseman with the Yankees with great potential, and the Yankees went to Japan in the early 50s, and he hit like 3 or 4 home runs on that tour of Japan. And teams would go, the World Series champions each year would go to Japan and play exhibition games. And he muscles up, hits those home runs, and it changed his entire batting stance. He just changed the way he was, and it screwed him up. He was looking for the home run after that, and I think that's basically why he ended up getting traded, and Clete Boyer taking his place.
Yeah, I mean, he played on, well, he was like, let me see, he was on the 55 team, 56, 57, 50. So he got a chance to play in a lot of World Series. I think he might have also played in 1960. But then when Clete came in from the Yankee minor league team, the Kansas City A's, you know, that was pretty much the end of Andy Carey.
Right. Clete was a terrific third baseman. How do you rank him with Brooks Robinson?
Well, to be honest, Ralph, I didn't see Clete till later in his career with the Yankees, but he was a terrific, third baseman. But I started following it in '64. So, but I mean, Brooks Robinson. I mean, we all remember what he did in the World Series. I mean, Brooks Robinson was, might have been the best of all time. And Cleat is right up there. And that kid they got in Colorado now, Arenado, he's sensational too.
Right, and the kid that went to the same high school with Arenado a few years after is playing with the A's, and he himself is one of the great third basemen of our time, and maybe all time. You can't believe how quickly he reacts on a swinging bunt. And he is in on the ball incredibly fast. His name is Chapman, and I get to watch him on a regular basis being out in Northern California. So, is baseball great or what?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's always something to talk about. I mean, if I'm not talking on the air to you, Ralph, I'm just talking about it to myself. So, I mean, this is the kind of stuff I think about all the time. Like,
I know. I can remember things from 50 or 60 years ago, but even this morning, I cannot remember where I put my keys.
Well, I look for my glasses and they're on my head, so.
I know that feeling too. Hey, I love talking ball with you. I love our little hot stove league Yankees. It just helps me get through the winter. How about that? Spring training, like 30 days away. That's got to be exciting. Are guys starting to trickle in, guys who are injured and what have you, and are rehabbing at this point?
Yeah, I mean, they'll start coming in, Ralph, probably about now. And a lot of the guys will work out for a couple weeks, and they'll actually start hitting the last week of January and early February. Another thing interesting, Ralph, the Yankees have, a fantasy camp coming up. And, Al Downing will be down there and Ronnie Bloomberg. And, let's all give our best wishes to Fritz Peterson, who's posted some things
absolutely.
on he posted some things on
Facebook. I hope he's well enough to travel. I doubt if he will be. He's suffering from the early onset of Alzheimer's disease, and what a tragedy. He's been on these airwaves. He's such a kick. Wow, and it's all of our biggest fears that we lose our ability to have cognizant thoughts. That's another thing about this world we live in. Hard to take. Best to you, Fritz. Enjoy your day.
Well, you too, Ralph, and always look forward to doing this anytime.
Beautiful. Degraw's Yankees on the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. We are talking hot stove baseball. Love it. We'll be back soon, and thanks for listening, everybody. We appreciate it. Adios, guys.
Take care.
The proceeding was a Comfortably Zoned Radio Network production. Thank you for listening.